Hello everyone, my name is Roya and today I'm coming to you with the books that I read in the first half of September. So firstly we have A Woman of the Sword by Anna Smith Spark. This was a really disappointing book to me, unfortunately. This is about a woman who is a soldier and she has two kids, and basically the point of this book is kind of illustrating how differently a woman gets treated if she has kids versus a man, because of course all the male soldiers, most of them have kids too, but nobody treats them any different once they find out that they have kids. But once they find out she has kids, they're like, oh, shouldn't you stay behind and blah blah blah. And so that's kind of the point, the premise of this book basically. But this book was so clunky and so jumpy. We were like kind of thrown around between present day and flashbacks so many times that I didn't really understand we were in a flashback at first. There was no separation at all, no kind of warning that it was a flashback, nothing. And it was just very, it almost read like it was a total stream of consciousness. Like the author literally just took a pen, put it on paper, and just wrote like nonstop and like didn't go back and change anything, kind of. And so we also get like the main character's thoughts in the middle of the dialogue, like not just, oh, I thought this, but what like she wishes she could say and what she's thinking. And it's like, that's poor writing if you need that in order to be able to tell what she's thinking. And then additionally, the point that this book is trying to make of the way that women are treated differently, or that mothers are treated differently from fathers, all of that is not even really done very well because it's so over explained. So every time it makes that point, every time the events of the story are making that point, it's like explained as if the reader is stupid. Like he was looking at her like he thought blah blah blah, and it was just so annoying. And basically by the end of the story, the main character's two sons are grown up and they are soldiers. They're fighting on the opposite sides of a battle, and one of them solely, like, he joined solely to kill his brother. Like, they hate each other now, and that's kind of extreme because nothing in this story, I mean, sure, we see throughout the story from the time they're little that they don't like each other, that they kind of resent each other based on how their mother treats each of them a little bit differently. But to kill each other, that's really extreme, and the events of the story really don't explain why that is what they go towards. So overall, really disappointing book, definitely one of the worst of the year so far. One for My Enemy, this is also a really disappointing book in that basically, the premise of the book sounds really interesting. It's about Baba Yaga and Koschei the Deathless being rival crime bosses, basically, and they have their children do their dirty work. So Baba Yaga's 6 daughters and Koschei's 3 sons are the ones like doing all the stuff that they need done, all that stuff, and basically, like, that sounds like such an interesting premise, but the vast majority of this book is literally just about the 2 youngest and the 2 oldest from each of them, like, falling in love. And I didn't really want that. I was not reading this book for that, and they didn't even have any sort of distinct personalities that made it interesting to read about them as a couple at all. There was just nothing there, and it was really boring. And also, I didn't really understand what the point of Baba Yaga having 6 daughters was, because we only ever see any of the middle ones besides the oldest and the youngest, except for like 1 chapter halfway through the book where they're introduced. We barely ever see them again. We even have like kind of an interlude about the 2 second oldest, who are twins, and their weird abilities that they have, involving like the spirit world and such, but it never comes up again. They never they're like not in the story hardly at all past that point, and I'm kind of like, why? It doesn't make any sense. And so overall, this book tried to do something unique and different, but it totally failed. On a much more positive note, Desert Echoes by Abdi Nazimian. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year because I love his books so much. His writing is so good and his plot lines are so good. This is unfortunately probably my least favorite of his books so far, but I still loved it. It was still still a strong 4-star read. I just felt like the things that I usually find in his books that I enjoy so much were not really present. And a lot more of this book was dialogue than necessarily, so it didn't really allow the good writing to show very much. And it felt like any side characters were really side characters. They were like really underdeveloped. And the first half of the book kind of felt like, when you're watching an old show like the Brady Bunch or something like that sort of era, how that set is literally the house. So anything that happens outside of the house is just talked about on set. It happens off scene. So it's literally like the dad comes home from work and says, I'm having this problem at work, but we don't see the problem at work. And then, that type of thing. That's what the first half of this book felt like, because we basically see just the three main characters and their families, and we don't see any side characters, even if they're at school or anything. Like, they don't come into contact with anyone else until about halfway through the book. And so I was kind of like, what kind of story am I reading here? I'm so confused. But overall, I really liked it, and I was really invested in the main character and what he was going through and what was ultimately going to happen. So basically, the plot line of this book, as I should have said at the beginning of my description of this book, but I didn't. So this book follows an Iranian boy whose boyfriend suddenly disappeared on a trip to Joshua Tree that they were both on, and he conveniently just does not remember anything about what happened. He just remembers not being able to find him, and so supposedly he was there at the time he disappeared, but he doesn't remember anything. And so he's not entirely convinced that his boyfriend is dead, even though the boyfriend's whole family assumes, of course, that he's dead, and they've kind of learned how to manage their grief by that point, but he definitely has not. So eventually we find out what actually happened, but that isn't even really necessarily the point. The point is for him to kind of figure out what's really going on with himself and with just everything around him, basically. And so that aspect of the story was so beautiful, and I really enjoyed reading it. Next, we have Ignite the Sun. This was a really enjoyable read. I didn't love this book, and it did do a few unique things with it that even though it's the same cookie cutter tropes we see, it's not exactly the same type of fantasy setting and fantasy beings and all of that stuff. But also, one thing that I gave it serious kudos for was it's a story about taking back a kingdom from a usurper, which, as you know, if you've seen a lot of my videos, I have a serious problem with those, because usually there is no real reason that the reader is shown why the usurper is so bad. Like, why does it really matter that the main character takes back the kingdom? But in this, we really do see, we see firsthand that the usurper has been persecuting a lot of people. So I really enjoyed that aspect of this book, in that it actually fills in that gap for us, and so I thought that this book held up really well. Next, we have Immunity Index. This was a really enjoyable read, but I felt like it was a lot, kind of. So this follows three different women who find out that they're clones, and I felt like it really could have just been from one of their perspectives. I felt like having multiple perspectives in this was a lot to juggle, and just made for a really diluted story. Hooked by Nir Eyal. This is my Works book club pick this month. This is about basically it's for the context of if you're making products like a website or something, how to make it so that people get hooked on it, that type of thing. But mainly it's just shown through examples of things like the login with Facebook thing, or like how other sites make it easy to use the site, or like Pinterest, where you can, as you're scrolling through Pinterest, you can see the next thing. So you still want to see what it is. You don't just like go, okay, I saw this many photos, I'm gonna stop now, that type of thing. So I thought that this was kind of an interesting book, and that it showed some kind of interesting examples, but for the most part it was mostly stuff that I knew, and so I was kind of bored. And And I also felt like it was a little bit misinformed in that the first sentence, almost, in the first paragraph of the book, talks about how shockingly 1/3 of Americans would rather give up sex than their phone. And I don't find that surprising because many of us are asexual. So why would it not be? To me, it's just a no-brainer that, of course, I'm surprised it's not more than 1/3 because I never think about sex. So I just thought that was a really stupid, just really presumptuous way to start a book. And then it said things like, for instance, if someone goes on a diet, they gain back the weight within 2 years and all of that. And like, of course they do. It's a diet is not permanent, you know, it's just for losing the weight. You don't stay on a diet that's made for losing weight. Like, it's so I just thought that was a really weird kind of, you know, there were some weird pieces of information like that where I kind of felt like, duh, like that's not supposed to be like that. You know what I mean? So overall, I did not enjoy this book as much as my work's previous book club picks, but I still thought that it had some good information in it and was kind of interesting at some points. And finally, The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I loved this book so much. This is about a girl who is staying with her cousin and his wife in order to secure a husband, and this is in like a fantasy version of Regency France, kind of. And so she finds this guy, and she falls in love with him, but the guy used to be in love with her husband's wife, and she jilted him because she needed money, and she wound up having to marry for money. And so the cousin's wife is really trying to ruin her life, basically, because she doesn't want someone else to end up with the guy she loved if she doesn't get to. And she is absolutely vicious. Like, she's definitely a really good villain. And we can't help but feel for the main character as well. And so this was just such a good book. The only thing that kept me from rating this 5 stars was the fact that obviously this is a fantasy. Magic plays a role throughout the story. Like, there's like magic is just commonplace throughout the story, but there is nothing done with the magic that makes it any kind of significant part of the story. It could have just been not there, and this could have just been a Regency romance, and it would have been exactly the same, basically. So that was the only thing that kept me from absolutely loving this book. That was the one complaint I had. Because, I mean, if I want a fantasy book, I want a fantasy book, kind of. So those are the books that I read in the first half of September. Let me know if you have read any of these and have any thoughts on them, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!